Thank you, everyone, for tuning in again to the Elite Development Podcast. Today, I have Mark Sauer, a scout with the Brandon Wheat Kings, sitting down with us. So, Mark, thanks for taking the time and agreeing to come on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Kenny. Happy to be here.
So, just to start off, could you give us a little bit of background about yourself? What got you into the job with the Wheat Kings, and then we'll talk a little more about what your job actually entails too.
Yeah, my story is a little bit different because I played very competitive hockey up until Bantam AAA, and I was playing very competitive tennis at the time too. So, kind of had a decision to make, and I followed the tennis, but I stayed involved in the hockey business. I did some volunteer coaching and kind of stayed in the community as best I could, and I got involved with an independent company out east called ISS Hockey, and they have a mentorship program that helps out some, aspiring scouts and helps them with networking and all that kind of stuff. And they put their reports in, and they're visible to different teams. And I was fortunate enough to get a phone call from the Wheat Kings a few years ago, and I guess the rest is history. And now I spend most of my winters in the rinks. I tend to hit about 300 games per season, and
Wow.
it's a lot, but we do it because we love being in the rinks. That I wouldn't want to be doing anything else. I really thoroughly enjoy doing it, and it's great to watch these kids develop. And we love doing what we do.
That's awesome. 300 games a year. Wow, that's a hell of a commitment.
Yeah, it's tiring.
Yeah, I can imagine. So, obviously, besides just watching the games, could you give us a little more background as far as the job of a scout, what it is you're looking for, who you're reporting to, process? Obviously, no name dropping, especially with the draft coming up right now, but just sort of the process of what goes into you putting certain players into Brandon Wheat King's mind.
So I guess in a nutshell, my season would be early in the year. We're trying to watch everybody. So obviously in the Western League, we draft out of Bantam. So we really try and key in on the kids that we want to watch for the rest of the year early on. Obviously it changes as the season goes on. Somebody could progress, somebody could regress. There's always going to be changes. But we try to zero in early in the year. We hit as many games as we can. Whenever I'm at the games, I'm taking a lot of notes just in regards to, I'm always evaluating skill and hockey IQ, how a guy's reading the game, lots of body language work. But yeah, that'll kind of sort itself out over the course of the year. We see these kids so many times that if one viewing isn't that good, we're going to see them probably 15 to 20 more times anyways. Yeah. So, it's a process, right? And all of my work goes into the form of scouting reports, and we report to our general manager reads the reports, and our director of scouting always reads them as well. And they kind of put a list together over the course of the year, basically rankings, if you will. And we'll, kind of figure out where we'd want to pit these kids in the draft. And, it's a long process, and there's a lot of changes go on over the course of the year. One thing about this job, I really compare it to being a meteorologist, because you're wrong a lot, and you have to be willing to suck that up sometimes. Because early in the year, you can be too excited about somebody, or maybe you weren't excited enough, and things change really quick. And there's always kind of segments of the season where you see kids develop, and it's a lot of trust in your gut, but also being willing to, admit that you're wrong sometimes, and the times that you're right, really enjoy it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you can go in, watch a kid score 3 goals in a game and think, holy, this guy's got it. And then it turns out he just had a great lucky night that night, and there's really not that much more to him. Or maybe you come out, you see a guy have a pretty bad game one day, and the next 10 or 12 times you see him, he's lighting it up, right? You never know.
Exactly, yeah. And we really try to get more than one set of eyes on the kid, too, over the course of the year, because there's going to be different opinions, and everybody sees things a little bit differently. If it wasn't that way, every team would have one scout who would travel everywhere. And, it's all about debate and kind of figuring out who you guys want as a group. And in our case, who do we want to be a Brandon Wheat King? It's really our motto. And who's a Wheat King on the ice is kind of what we go by.
Yeah, I like that. So as far as who's a Wheat King, is there can you sort of elaborate on what it is you guys are looking for when you're saying someone who emulates the Wheat King mentality?
Well, number one in any scout's book is usually going to be skill. If you don't have skill, it's going to be very difficult to crack a lineup, and you got to be smart enough to play in the league. Obviously, the game's very fast. You got to be able to think on your feet very quickly. and kind of the more intangible type stuff. In our organization, we really emphasize character. We're very much trying to find good people as well as good hockey players, because we're a very community-based organization, obviously being in a smaller city.
Yeah.
And we want the guys that are going to be going into the community and willing to, do some of the community work, and also like be good to the fans in the arena, and also just be a good teammate. Character is always number one for us, and that's a tough thing to replace, and it's not something that you can teach. And if somebody's got that, and we find that out, they're going to go up in our on our books pretty quick.
Yeah, I like the sounds of that. I mean, I've always been a big believer that you need the skill of the game to play at any high level, but you want those guys in the room that are going to bring the room together, right? Not split it apart.
Yeah.
And so even if they are very skilled, but they have that sort of mentality of they're in it for them and they're not in it for the other guys. Correct me if I'm wrong, but in my view, I would think that would put you down in the rankings at least a little bit.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of egos in hockey. Whenever you get to a certain level, this applies to any sport. Once you get to a certain level, there's going to be a lot of egos involved,
Absolutely.
and it's just about how people channel that. We need you to be confident. We need you to know what you're capable of, but you got to be willing to take a step back sometimes and do what's best for the group as a whole. And if we can find, these are obviously really young guys, and if we can find guys that are doing that at that age, we have a good feeling that going into whenever they're 19, 20 years old in their last years in our league, that they're going to be really good leaders for us.
Yeah, I think that's huge. It's cool you guys are thinking long term about that too. Like just, looking at this 13, 14-year-old kid and trying to get a feel for what they're going to be like when they're 19 or 20 as well, and not just looking at them for who they are right now.
Yeah, yeah. It's a lot of projecting for sure, which is difficult, but it's part of the fun too. So
Yeah. Yeah, and on that note, like for those 13-year-old, 14-year-old kids that are maybe like a year away from their draft year or going into their draft year this year, is there something in particular, like when you say character, is there a way that you guys are finding that character? Like, is it through player interviews? Or is there things on the ice that you're looking for that tip you off, or what sort of goes into that?
Well, early in the year, we don't really talk to a whole lot of players. We'll usually just kind of watch the game, see how it unfolds. Body language is always a big thing, and we do have to be careful with that because some people just express differently than others. And obviously, there's a lot of competitiveness going on too. So sometimes somebody can get carried away, and somebody could be the most humble guy off the ice, but they get really competitive, and sometimes your emotions get the better of you. But so early in the year, we're just more looking for the skill, and then the hockey sense, and later on we start looking for that kind of stuff, and who's not communicating with his teammates on the ice, or who's rolling his eyes and shaking his head after he doesn't get a pass he wants, or who's staying out on the ice too long. And then whenever it comes down to player interviews, I think it just really comes down to, obviously people are going to be nervous, so we don't really expect perfect interviews, but we just try and get a feel for who he is as a person. And we always talk to coaches as well and really try and get their feel on different kids. And we try and put all this information together to get a good feel for it. There's not really one thing that we do that we think makes it perfect. And mistakes will be made. Sometimes, maybe you read somebody wrong and they're better than you think that way, or not as good. But it's, it's a process, and we do the best we can to weed out the right people for sure.
Yeah, of course. Like you're always gonna make mistakes, just like the players sometimes are all gonna make mistakes too, right? So if you were talking to one of those 13, 14-year-old kids right now, outside of the scouting role, would there be any advice, anything in particular you would tell them, hey, going into this year, things they should work on, things they should make sure they're watching out for, things they shouldn't be doing? Just anything that can kind of help them differentiate themselves and put them in a good view for scouts that might be looking at them.
I think the biggest thing is consistency. If you can bring it every single game, and on that note, every single shift, we're going to notice you. We don't go out looking for one thing and then we key on you. We let the good players find us. And if we get a good feel on a guy and he's making an impact every game that we see and every shift within those games, that's going to be a huge difference maker for sure. And, I think it's just going to be a matter of, as well, there's a different kind of pressure in your draft year, obviously. And our motto is always, like, you're playing this level of hockey for a reason. Do what got you there. You don't need to try to do more, because these people, selected you for this team for a reason. There's a reason we're watching you, and we need them to do what they do best, because we don't want any surprises whenever if they come to our training camp, right? And I think they just need to do what they do best, and if they're good enough, we will find them at the end of the day.
Yeah, I like what you said there. I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, I think there are a lot of kids who, the second they know the scouts watching, they feel like they need to do something extra. They need to stand out. They need to make sure you see them. But just what you said about consistency, I think that's a really common theme. Like, in the strength and conditioning realm, something we talk about a lot is it's one thing to show up to the gym every once in a while, lift some weights. Yeah, you might get some results, but the way you get the best result, just like in sport, is consistency. Come to the gym, bring it every time, leave when you've brought it all and you've got nothing left. Like, that's the mentality is you've always got to bring it. And so you're sort of saying the same thing you guys are looking for is those guys that bring it and those guys that play hard and play their game.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and like, it's pretty obvious usually who the coaches trust too, because those will be the guys after about the first 3 weeks of the season. Those will be the guys that are out in big situations. And we notice that stuff too, for sure.
Yeah. No, I think that's huge. I really like that. Just the mindset of, again, looking at what they're bringing to the game, not necessarily the outcome, because you can play a great game and not score at all, or you can play a terrible game, just be in the right place at the right time a couple times and have 2 or 3 goals, right? It's the effort that goes into it more so than the outcome that comes out of it, if I'm hearing you correctly.
No, absolutely. And, there's going to be players that are playing on not as strong of a team as well. And it's a lot tougher for them to, for lack of a better way of putting this, to look good. I don't like saying it that way, but at the end of the day, if the important stuff is there, we will still notice it. If you're on a team that's lost, triple the amount of games that you've won, we're still going to see what we need to see from you. It's not going to be a matter of we're not watching your team or we're not watching you. And I think that's important. So a lot of kids will get discouraged if there's a tough year at that age, and it's understandable. But at the end of the day, we're still there, and we're not going to write off a team because their record isn't where some of the other teams are.
Yeah. And it's like, feel free to jump in if you think I'm incorrect here, but I would almost think that's even a bigger opportunity for a player, because it's easy to get discouraged. It's easy to sort of start pointing fingers and, kind of have that frustration come out when you're on a team that's losing a lot more than they're winning. But if you've got scouts watching and you're being that character player, you're being the leader on the team when you guys are getting blown out, I think if anything, that's going to put you in the good books just that much quicker, because it shows the kind of character you're going to bring to the next level.
Yeah, that really brings out the character quick, and it separates who can play through adversity as well. One thing that we really watch is to elaborate on what you just said, in the tough games and your 5-0 games, who's still coming out and playing in the third period and all that kind of stuff, right? So yeah, it's a lot, but it's one of those things where you do notice it, and the guys that will bring it in those situations really do stick out for sure.
Yeah, because I can only imagine, like, I know I played on a couple of those teams when I was younger, that you just knew every time you were going out, it wasn't a question of, are we going to win tonight? It was, how badly are we going to get blown out tonight? And it is tough to kind of, get past that and still go out and play as hard as you can. But I do think it's a crucial thing that you've got to be able to bring to your game, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more.
And so then coming into player interviews and sort of more when you're getting into the later parts of the season, you've got a pretty good idea, sort of, I don't know numbers, but you've got a pretty good idea of what guys you're looking at and what guys you're maybe not as interested in.
Mm-hmm.
In that later point in the season, is there anything that a player could do that, whether you're talking from your own experience or otherwise, that would turn you off? Like someone who maybe you've been watching and you're interested in, and something that could happen that could maybe drop them down in your books later in the year?
That's a tough one. Like, there's a lot of things that can happen, both good and bad, at any point in the season, really. One thing that, I guess, if we're going to say something that in a way could turn you off, is if a guy, say we get down to late in the season and it's playoff season and somebody disappears, maybe that's something that we kind of turn our heads at a little bit. I think at that point in the season, though, we've got a pretty good idea of who we're watching. So it's not going to be as much of a, identifying players as much as we've identified players where they're watching these kind of more specific guys and let's see what they do in these situations. As far as actually talking to players goes, the only thing I'd say that would really turn us off would be and this is the most cliche thing I'll say all day, I promise, but a bad attitude. If you exude kind of a overly, whether it be overly confident or standoffish kind of vibe whenever we're talking to you, it's not necessarily going to bump you down our list right away, but we won't forget that, and it's something that we do kind of remember. But my job is more identifying on the ice. So I try not to read too much into that, and I let management make their decisions when it comes down to those kind of things. But at the end of the day, again, consistency. Bring it all the time in the big situations, or whenever maybe it doesn't matter as much if you're losing big. Just always bring it. And at the end of the day, consistency is what I'm going to be looking for.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, as much as, yeah, the bad attitude is a cliche thing, I think it's a cliche for a reason, right? Like, that is something that standoffish or overly confident or cocky, like, you bring that into that next level. And I think first, you're probably going to get crushed. But second, like, if you bring that into the next level, that's not what that team's looking for.
Yeah.
And so I think it's, as much as, yeah, it is a cliche, I think you nailed it, right? It's important as well. Like, what you bring into the locker room is going to be just as important as what you bring into the game.
Yeah, absolutely. There's always got to be respect when it's needed, for sure.
Okay. And on the same note, is there anything like, and again, you can draw from your own experience or just from, your time being a scout, what you would think about it. But is there anything that maybe a player that you haven't been looking at through the year, or you maybe looked at but sort of have decided, he's not really on the radar anymore? Anything they can bring out late in the season that kind of makes you rethink your position on them?
We never stop watching those guys, for sure. As much as we'll key in on certain guys late in the year after we've kind of identified early, there's always going to be somebody comes up and surprises you after Christmas, and late in the season, and even in the playoffs. A couple of times I've had a kid that's all of a sudden jumped off the page at me and have an impact. That's it. If you have an impact every time you're on the ice in some way, shape, or form, I'm not talking necessarily goals or anything like that, but if you have some sort of impact when you're on the ice, it's going to be noticed. At the end of the day, I'm there, or anybody in my position is there to notice things. And if you have an impact like that, odds are somebody's going to see it. And it's just go out and have something happen, whether it be forcing a turnover or creating scoring chances or finishing your checks, providing energy for your team, maybe scoring. Anything totally depends on the player, and every player is going to impact the game differently. But at the end of the day, have an impact. And even if we didn't maybe notice you early on, maybe I'm on my 15th viewing of your team and I'm like, I don't think I have a single note on this guy, but I always walk away and I remember his name when I leave. That's something that happens to me more often than not. It happens a lot.
Yeah, I can imagine, like, just even if he's not the flashy guy on the ice, right? Like, every team needs that player.
Yep.
I grew up a Sens fan, so the one I always remember is Chris Phillips. I think he scored on average 1 or 2 goals a season for Ottawa, and I just always remember watching him because it was a blast just watching how he punished guys in front of the net. And like, he wasn't flashy, he wasn't fancy, but he just did his job day after day, and he did it well for, I think, 17 years by the time he retired.
Yeah, absolutely. The best players know their role and they play it. Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
I like that a lot. And then so once the draft happens and you've got your sort of new draft class, as a scout, do you have much of a role with those guys once they've been picked? Are you helping them transition into the league at all, or
Not a ton. My job basically is, without going into too much detail, just my job is basically to, as a regional scout, be the first point of contact for those guys and their families, if they're like the Southern Alberta guys in my case. We do go to training camp every year and we evaluate rookie camp in particular, and then also the main training camp. But my big role is just kind of be the first point of contact, answer any questions they have, whenever the draft is over, because I'll always see them at, like, for example, the Hockey Alberta U16 camp or something like that, or and we'll always give out phone numbers, and we'll make sure we reach out to the new picks and their families and just welcome them to the organization. And at the end of the day, once they make the team, they're in their hands.
Yeah.
I'm out here in Calgary, so there's not a whole lot I can do, but a lot of them don't make the team the first year too. So say, for example, they're playing with the Calgary Buffaloes or something like that. I'll go to their games and I'll make sure I reach out and communicate with them once in a while and talk to their parents at the games and talk to them after the game and stuff, just to, see how things are going.
Yeah.
In a weird sort of way, I'm just kind of the PR guy whenever the draft is done, but
Yeah, that makes sense. So again, but just sort of keeping in touch, keeping like you're sort of their point of contact with the organization,
exactly.
maybe for that year if they've been drafted and they're not with the team right away.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And have you noticed like anything in particular about players? And if not, no worries. But anything in particular about certain players who you found have gone straight from the draft and had success in the Western League? Like anything that kind of translates really well for those guys?
Very, very difficult to do.
Sorry, just 1 second.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, we're good. I just had something come through on the screen, but I'm back. So
Yeah, no worries.
You were good with the question there, though?
Oh yeah, for sure. But yeah, the big thing is like obviously nobody makes the league because as 15-year-olds you can only play a certain amount of games in our league anyways.
Yeah.
But the guys that are going to jump in and make an impact early on generally are it's not an easy question to answer, but they're guys that have that little bit of the extra tools, right? Like a little bit of extra skill. They're a little bit quicker. It's a lot of physical maturing to do in a few years moving into our league as well. So we draft you at 14, 15. And whenever you start playing in our league, you're generally 16, 17, or 18. So, it comes down to how much they physically mature as well. Maybe they could play, but they still need to fill out. Maybe they still weigh 145 pounds or something like that. And they're going to be out there playing against guys that are built like men.
Yeah.
So, it's there's a lot of factors go into play. And at the end of the day, if you've got the intangibles like the smarts and the skating and all that stuff, you've always got a chance. But it's a tough league and it takes time, and guys really have to trust the process for sure.
Yeah. So that physical ability is obviously a big thing in coming in right away. If you're 5'2" and 130 pounds, you're probably not going to last too quickly against guys who are stepping into the NHL in a year or two.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense because I think obviously from what I do, like the physical preparation is a huge thing we look at. And, physical preparation to step into any next level, whether that's into Bantam AAA or into the Western League or into the pros after, being prepared physically to step into that level is a huge part of the game for sure.
Absolutely. The summers are always very important. Just as far as development goes, the guys that put in the extra work on the ice and in the gym, and we notice it whenever training camp comes around and you're fighting for a spot on the team. It doesn't take long to see the guys who have put the work in the summer for sure.
Yeah. And do you guys have too much discussion with guys, like whether it's over the course of the season or whether like you sort of put your word in once the guys get drafted at any point there? Do you guys have much discussion with them about like what they're doing to prepare for the year and just to kind of get an idea there as well? Or is that sort of in their hands and
we'll always try to get a feel for it. Just kind of ask what the plans for the summer are. We don't dictate it. We let them do what they need to do. A lot of them are really good about finding conditioning coaches and ice time and all that kind of stuff. So we're not too worried about it. If you've worked hard enough to get drafted into the league, 99.9% of guys are going to put the work in after the fact because they want to make the big club now, right? So we just kind of try and get a feel for what's going on. But at the end of the day, it's in their hands. And if they put the work in, then, it'll be good.
Yeah, that makes sense. Once you're at that level, I'd hope you've at least got it in the back of your mind that, hey, preparing to get into the next level might give me a shot, right?
We're gonna have a long talk if that's not the case.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, so that's a lot about what goes into it for the players. But we've talked a lot about consistency, a lot about just the the extra effort and the attitude. And then, is there anybody, I'll put you on the spot a little bit here. Is there anybody from past seasons in your time with the Wheat Kings that you're particularly proud of having picked out or having scouted?
Well, this past year was kind of the first year where I was really involved with the draft, and we had 3 first-round draft picks, which was awesome. And we had Nate Danielson come out of the Red Deer program last year, and his odds of making our team are pretty good right now. But it's all a process. Like we've had Brett Highland come out of Alberta as well. He's from Edmonton, and there's a lot of good players in our organization, so I don't want to single out very many guys. But it's we'll see how these guys develop. It takes time, and I'm still new enough on the scene that it remains to be seen where these guys end up. So we don't know how smart I am just yet.
So well, it's a process for you too, right? Everybody's got
Yeah,
to learn their role and keep adjusting with it.
yeah, exactly. We'll see how happy everybody is with me in a couple of years' time, and then we'll have that discussion.
Sounds good. We'll have you on again sometime down the road.
Yeah, exactly.
And so then one other question I had for you is obviously with your role with stuff that's going on with players on the ice, we've gone through quite a lot of what you're looking for there and what you're looking for with the player as a whole. In this age now with, the emergence of social media, the internet being such a huge widespread thing, are you guys looking into players in that respect at all, like what they're doing on social media, kind of the character they portray there as well, or is that kind of out of your hands?
It's out of my particular job, but we're like any other employer at the end of the day. We're monitoring the social media because it's something that has to be monitored. Some people misuse it. Any part of the world, any job, I think that's applicable. If you post something stupid, your bosses aren't going to be too happy with you.
Yeah.
And the same applies for these guys. They're young guys, and they need to conduct themselves properly. And we want to our team has such a good reputation of character and all that kind of stuff that we can't be dealing with controversial posts or anything like that. It's not what we're all about, and we welcome the guys to be active on social media, but in the right ways, for sure.
Yeah. Or like, is there any, I mean, well, we won't go into any actual examples, but again, with social media, is there any guidelines you'd sort of give to players to think about? Because obviously, again, these are 13, 14-year-old kids. Sometimes they maybe don't have the maturity yet to understand what's good, what's bad. From your point of view, is there anything you'd be sort of telling them as a guideline, like something to think about before clicking that post button? Or
It's a tough one, but obviously they're young, and the big thing is just think twice before you post something. Be smart about it. Feel free to put on like something personal, like a trip or something, but don't get into political topics or very at that age. You already know kind of what the controversial topics are, and I think you're smart enough, and if we're dealing with you, you're hopefully mature enough to understand what's appropriate and what's not. At the end of the day, I think it comes down to common sense, and we're willing to talk through it if problems arise, but show some common sense and be smart about it. Is it?
yeah, I mean, I think like just from what you were saying there, it applies back to a lot of the same stuff on the ice, right? Like you know what players are looking, what people are looking for, what people aren't looking for, and it's just about making the right decisions
Yeah.
and continuing on that respect.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. So I think I've got a lot of great info here. I think this is a pretty good spot to wrap up. I think we got a pretty good feel for what yourself or what potentially some other Western League scouts are looking for when they're going to the games. And Mark, I appreciate the time so much. And just before we head out, is there anything else you'd like to say, just as a whole, to the kids in Bantam and maybe even the kids in Midget that's maybe missed out on their draft year but are still hoping to make the jump?
I'm really glad you said that last part, because the only other thing I'd want to say is, the draft is so many players get picked every year. And we're obviously young enough that people are going to physically develop at different rates. And I think the big thing is if you don't get picked, don't be discouraged. Keep putting the work in, and if you put in the right work, somebody may notice you, whether it be us in the Western League or whether it be the junior A clubs or NCAA or whatever. Like somebody will notice you if you put in the right work. And I can't emphasize enough to not give up if you're not drafted whenever you're 14 years old, because there's lots of time to figure it out still. And keep working hard, and you never know.
And for those guys that are maybe a year or two older that missed their draft year, again, like beyond just that consistency, would there be anything that would maybe spark your interest as a scout in a particular player, or would it be the same sort of stuff you're looking at with the Bantam guys coming into their draft?
It's going to be a lot of the same things, but slight adjustments made based on their age, just based on speed and strength and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, the most important things go through right to the NHL Pro Scouts, I think. We're looking for the same things. We're just looking for them at different levels and at different ages. And I think it's pretty across the board for what we're looking for.
Yeah, that makes sense. So just the way that they would fit into the team, the adjustment they'd be able to make into the next level,
Yeah.
and just a little bit different depending on if you're 13 or if you're 17, and
Yeah,
what
exactly.
you're able to bring.
There's always going to be the possibility to reach the next level if you do it right, for sure.
Yeah, I really like what you said there, because I think there are a lot of guys that maybe miss that draft year, and then all of a sudden hockey kind of turns into the, oh, I'll just play for fun instead of focusing on making the next level, and you never know what could have been, right?
One of my favorite examples, just before we wrap up here, my favorite example of that is Jake Bean, that played with the Calgary Hitmen however many years ago, 5-6 years ago now. Wasn't drafted into the Western League, got listed by the Hitmen, and turned into one of the best D-men in the league, and he got drafted in the top 10 overall in the NHL draft. So there's always possibilities for the guys that don't get drafted, and he is one of the best examples in recent memory, for sure.
Wow, I didn't know that he actually wasn't drafted into the Western League. I knew what he turned into going down the road, but wow, that's amazing. I didn't know that he wasn't drafted in that first year.
Yep. No, he didn't get drafted. He played minor midget, and one thing led to another, and he is who he is today. So
Yeah, and clearly it's working out pretty well for him so far.
yeah, I think he's doing okay.
Yeah, so I think that's a great that's an awesome finishing point. Just talking about it is true. Like whatever level you're at, if you're continuing to show what those scouts are looking for and continuing to put that extra effort in, there's always a way. There's always a way in. There's always a back door in as well.
Yep. No, couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Awesome. So again, Mark, thank you so much for taking the time and doing this today. I really appreciate your insights from your own position as a scout, and I'm sure there are a ton of those kids coming into the Bantam draft or still playing in midget right now that are going to get a lot out of this. So
I hope so. Yeah, we're here to help, and I'm looking forward to seeing some of these guys. Thanks a lot for having me on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And if there are any parents out there or any athletes out there, if you're open to doing this kind of thing, where would they be able to reach you to sort of talk about whether it's about themselves and their own career, or anything, any knowledge or any questions they might have for you in your position?
Well, if they're in the rinks, I'm probably the shortest guy in a Wheat Kings jacket, so you can find me there. But they can always reach out to our team, or to myself. You've got my information. But there's always ways to reach out to us, and we're willing to. I'm also active on Twitter and whatnot. So if they do ever need to reach out, and if it's something I can answer, I'm happy to, for sure.
Awesome. I'll make sure to link that in the notes too. So thank you so much again, and we'll talk again soon, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kenny.